Welcome to the channel Tribe. In this session of 12th virtual meetup, we are having Jency Stella discussing on API testing got real.
Welcome all to the 12th virtual meetup, where we have two speakers, Jency and Siddhant, speaking on very interesting topics. So before moving on, I would like to thank our annual sponsors, BrowserStack. Huge shout out to BrowserStack, our exclusive sponsors for all community events and premier sponsors for all conferences. We move on to second session of today, uh, which is on API testing by Jency Stella. So, Jency is an ardent software tester and has been investigating the line between software and testing for past 9+ years. Uh, sh- she started her software testing journey as an ETL test engineer to currently she is a lead QA engineer in a role of passionate API tester at Bellingham uh, in Malaysia. So I would like to call Jency on the stage. Hi, Jency.
Chika.
Hi. So, you can take over now. You can share your
Sure,
screen, and we can now learn about API testing.
sure.
Okay.
Okay, heartiest welcome to everyone to the Test Tribe 12th virtual meetup. Happy to see you all here on a weekend to spend some quality time with us. This is my first meetup presentation, I can say. So, if I make any flaws or any misconcepts that is conveyed by me, then please excuse me in that area. So let's get started off with it. Myself, Jency Stella, although Vanshika gave a good intro about me, I would like to share a few highlights from my end as well. I'm a lead QA engineer at Millennium IT Services with overall 9 years of experience in software testing space. For the next 40 to 45 minutes, I'll be sharing some interesting content on the topic API testing got real. Today's talk will be more like a knowledge sharing session, I can say, based on the topics that I recently explored in my API testing journey. So, before starting with that, some background about me. I'm a mom of a 4-year-old superhero. I hold ISTQB, CTFL, and CTAE certification. Also, in recent times, I cleared my advanced test manager level as well in ISTQB. In my spare time, I try to help budding testers and specifically women in testing space in areas I can via Mentoring Club, which is a non-profit organization, and I'm a certified mentor there. A year back, I started my community contribution, and a few months back, also started my speaking journey. Apart from that, in my spare time, I love to write articles. That's where I wear a hat of a occasional blogger. So that's a quick intro about me. So, what I have in store for you all today, the agenda goes in this manner. We'll be knowing about APIs and API testing. I'll be sharing some glimpse about it. Then we'll be knowing about an very popular tool, Postman, from testing space, within which I'll be trying to showcase so how test scripts are like written and how is it like handy for API testers in Postman, how you can build that. I'll be sharing that. Furthermore, we'll be talking about some interesting topics which are quite often ignored by API testers like mocking and monitoring. Towards the end, I'll share some highlights about GRPC and contract testing. Alongside, I'll be also talking about command line companions, which is one interesting topic I can say. In recent times, Postman had new features added to it, so we'll be talking about that. And finally, we'll be ending the session with some live demo uh, based on the theoretical concepts that we'll be knowing in today's session. So let's get started off with it. APIs. APIs, this term is one of the limelight topic in recent times everywhere. We can hear this term. Before we deep dive into the topic for today, let's understand why this sudden hype is given to APIs. Nowadays, consumer orientation has changed the structure of software. Modern applications are scattered across mobile devices and web browsers. So users can access, the services anytime, anywhere. Also, in addition, applications are no longer self-contained. They are made up of in multiple services. which are linked at runtime. All this led to the need of API first approach. We are not going to talk about API first approach in detail today, but in short, if I have to say what is API first approach, it's nothing but putting APIs at the foundation instead of pre-built software solutions. Technically, API stands for Application Programming Interface. So, like the name suggests, it's an interface that allows two applications to talk to each other. In other words, I can say that API is a set of tools using which one program can interact and exchange data with another program. So, that's a short intro about APIs. But if I have to put it in an example and explain you in layman terms, just think about the switchboard operators in early telecommunication days. Like how switchboard operators used to connect calls, API enables communication between applications or softwares. Technically, if I have to give an example on this, let's think about the example that you want to browse Facebook on your and you wish to browse that. So, what do? You type www.facebook.com into your browser. A request goes to the Facebook's remote server. Once the browser receives the response, it interprets the code and displays the page for us. To the browser, also known as the client, Facebook server is an API. This means that every time you visit a page on the web, you interact with some remote server API. So then somebody might think, so does that mean API, all remote servers are APIs? No, it's not. An API isn't the same as remote server. Rather, it is the part of the server that receives the request and sends the response. So technically, this is how API operates. Now that we have known what exactly APIs are all about, it becomes obvious that API testing checks whether an API operates correctly or not. When I talk about checking the terms, this process helps to ensure the performance, functionality, security, and reliability of software meets the expectation. In other words, if I have to put them, API testing helps you to check whether your API is able to handle simultaneous visitors all at one time, bring the exact response that was expected, and so on. So let's say if this testing wasn't performed, then what will happen? Consequently, the result will be ineffective APIs, which can result in integration difficulties, poor software quality, user frustrations, and so on. So, to elaborate more, why exactly or what is the importance of API testing, let's think of an application in general. We all know that a typical application has three distinct layers: a data layer, service layer, which is also referred as business layer, and the presentation layer, or you can term it as UI layer. The business logic of the application or the guide to how user can interact with the services, functions and the data that are held up in an application all lies in the business layer, that is the service layer. And API testing focuses on this particular business layer in order to validate the business logic. Not only this, it also checks the security of your application, data responses and so on. Due to these critical aspects, API testing is of utmost importance. So this gives us a clear understanding of the importance of API testing and why is it needed to perform an API testing. Now that we have known about API testing, one might think that, okay, Jency, you're saying that API testing needs to be done, but how do I do that? So in order to do that, we have many API testing tools available in market in recent times. So in today's session, we'll be talking about one of the popular tool, that is Postman. So let's start exploring Postman from API testing perspective. Postman is an API development environment. Survey says that more than 7 million developers are using Postman today. With Postman, it's not that since I said it's a very popular API testing tool, it's not that it's only used for testing. No, with Postman, you can design, you can mock, you can debug, you can document, you can monitor, and even you can publish your APIs all at one time. Our session today will be focusing on the testing space that is offered by Postman. So like I said, Postman is a very comprehensive API testing tool. Why I'm saying this is like it makes easy to set up your manual and automated API test. You can aggregate the test and requests that you have created into a single test sequence without any hiccup. That's very smooth and it is that handy to handle as well. So before we see the test sequence or about the test scripting in Postman, it's always good to know the basics that are tied up in any tool. So let's understand the basics before we jump into the core topic for today. So, for anyone who would like to start exploring Postman, then the first and the foremost topic you would need to know is the building blocks. So, here I have highlighted the building blocks of Postman. So, in short, if I have to explain each one of them, workspace, this is ideally is a space or an area that allows you to organize your APIs. I personally refer the workspace as a playground to play around with my APIs. Collections are nothing but the group of saved requests. We can organize all our requests by creating folders within a collection. It's normally called the repository to save your request. Environment, we as testers will be working in different environments, for instance QA, UAT, and at times, for prod checking we also have certain access to prod. So while working on these different environments, each environment will have different set of configurations. They can have different set of URL, different set of token IDs, different set of passwords, and so on. So to access these corresponding values, environment comes handy. So that's where environment is useful, and Postman provides a specific environment as a building block to support this particular feature. Next is the request. In Postman, we can save our request and collection, like I said before. And to use them in any time, you can use them from the collection. So requests are basically what? Basically, they are the combination of URL, headers, and the payload, that is the body of the request. An API request allows us to retrieve data from the a data source, or to send the data where it's intended to do. For now, Postman supports three different types of requests, that is HTTP request, GRPC request, and WebSocket request. WebSocket is still in the beta version. So for now, we can just have a good feel of HTTP request and GRPC request in today's session. So this was the overview of building blocks of Postman. Now the next topic one need to know in basics area is know what exactly is this request that we are talking about, the response that we are talking about, and how this request and response will be working in Postman. So let's understand that. Like I explained in my previous slide, APIs provide a structured way of for one application to access the capabilities of another application. Typically, all this communication happens over the internet. So, how ideally this works is like a client application sends a request to the server, and after the request is processed, the server returns the response back to the client. So, what exactly this request ideally holds when it is hit? It holds nothing but the URL, API endpoints, and the HTTP request method. These methods are nothing but are actions that you want the API to perform. Some of the most commonly used methods in our day-to-day testing life is like get, which helps us to retrieve certain data from an API, post, which sends data to an API, patch or put, which updates the existing data, and then the delete, which removes the existing data. So these are the four major or commonly used methods I can say when it comes to testing space. Once this request is all processed, the responses are received from the API server. So ideally, what response holds when an API consumer is like using it? The response holds the response body, headers, and the HTTP status code. So in Postman, how this request and response works is like, for instance, let's say from Postman, you send a get request to an API, for example, Postman Echo API. Then the request is sent to the Postman Echo API server located at the postmanecho.com. The API server receives the request, processes it, and returns a response to the Postman. Postman then receives the response and displays it in the response pan. So here Postman acts as the client application and it communicates with an API server. This is how sending request and receiving response operates in Postman. With all these basics in mind, let's now dive into the test scripting space of Postman. While using Postman for testing purpose, one doesn't need to write any HTTP client network code. Instead, what we do is we will be building test suites called collections and let the Postman interact with the API. This tool is very convenient when it comes to executing APIs, like I said in my previous slide. Once you have saved the details, we simply need to use them over and over again. You need not, remember it like exact endpoint, headers, API keys, everything. There's no need of you to remember all these things. So, giving this background, I would like to give you a short update about how the test approach is normally done in Postman. The structure that you see in screen here is the way that I personally do in my day-to-day API testing journey. So the step one that I would like to highlight is about understanding your API. How do I do that? We as testers will be normally provided with the API docs. So you have to explore the doc in order to understand your API better. Only then you can build your test suite. So once you are well versed with the API that you are about to play around, start building your test suite. When I say test suite, like I said, collections are the topic that will come into our mind when it comes to test suite. So once your test suite is like all done, the next step is like you need to execute your test suite. How do I do that? In Postman, there is a feature known as collection runner inbuilt within the application itself, via which you can execute your test suite. Okay, now that we have executed the test suite, then there might be cases where you are done with the QA phase and you're moving to UAT. So you have certain time gap in between it, and you plan to store your scripts in some repo or something. So Postman enables that as well. You can integrate your source code repositories with Postman. One example that I can say is GitLab. You can integrate your GitLab account with Postman so that you can maintain all your test suites in the GitLab repository. Not only that, one might also think how I can automate my test suite completely. You can do that with integrating with your CI CD pipeline as well. So, in today's session, I'll be more focused towards how to create the test suite, how to run the test suite from the Postman collection runner. Along with that, Postman also has the beauty of running the runners from command line. I'll be showing that. Not only this, towards the end, I'll be showing you how you can automate your test suite with GitHub Actions. So this is how, in short, test approach in Postman happens. Normally, I can say API test should be performed in this way. Next topic is about mocking and monitoring. Mocking and monitoring are two crucial elements that aid in improving the API testing procedure. We don't give these two aspects enough consideration as API testers. So I felt like highlighting that in front of you today. So let's understand this topic in a better manner. Before we jump into knowing mocking in API testing, let's understand what exactly is mocking. Mocks are nothing but an imitation, or simply you can refer it as fake. It simulates the behavior of a real API. A mock server, what does it consist of all about? It consists of a server which one can, which on matching certain requests returns a predefined responses. So how does this all work? It's pretty simple. You have to just finalize your expected response, configure your mock server, then the server will send the same response back to you. This is a short intro about mocking. Now, how do we relate this in API testing space? Um, Being or living in an agile world, you cannot wait for every time for your API to be completely ready and then start with your testing activity. So, what do we do in that case? We are normally given with API documents with the sample responses to elaborate or to know more about the API that we'll be working on. Using these sample responses, we can create mock APIs, and that endpoint can be used for your testing purposes. Like I said in my previous slide, mock servers are nothing but a single base URL which is configured to return the specified predefined response. So every time you hit the specific endpoint, the same response will be like returned. So then somebody might ask, okay, Jency, that you're saying that mock servers has all these features. How is it helpful in testing space? It is helpful in many ways. We can analyze the response body and understand what is expected in the body even before the development is like completed. We can start writing our assertions for our response body. So once the actual API is like fully developed, you can just replace your mock server URL with the endpoint that is expected, and then your test script is already ready. This helps to continue the development even on where let's say you have an external service combined in your project that you're working, and it is like failed for certain reason. Even in that scenario, mocking that particular external service, you can continue with the development activity. This also avoids data sharing and supports to test the endpoints individually. So these are certain very crucial benefits related to mocks, but often people ignore it. In your API testing journey, I would highly recommend to touch base this mocking concept when you're planning to test any APIs. The next topic is about monitoring. Monitoring is also another crucial topic coupled with API testing. So, what exactly is monitor? When it comes to monitoring the behavior of a running API, we can break them in three different categories: availability of the API, performance of the API, and correctness of the functionalities the API offers you. So, now that we have understood these are the three different categories that we need to concentrate in monitoring, but how do they, how do we incorporate, how do we practice this thing? We can catch bugs earlier. Monitoring your API gives you a chance to catch any bug or issues early enough and before your API is released to the customer. Monitoring combined with API testing builds more confidence to the team. How? API monitoring gives teams more confidence to roll out changes faster without the fear of breaking things unintentionally. The more comfortable the team is while releasing the software, the faster the release of new features to the customers. We will be the first one to know when your system or when your API is down, and not the customers or the business partners who are actually relying on your APIs. Moreover, sooner you know about a problem, the faster you can act on it, and it most likely that that can create minor damages to your services. So these are certain important benefits of monitoring your API. Also, people ignore this particular concept, so make sure that you have a practice of using this monitoring features in your API testing area. The next topic is about command line companions. So what are these command line companions? In Postman, after you successfully build your test suite, you can run them in two different ways. One is, like I said in my previous slide, you can run it from the collection runner. Also, you can run it from the command line directly. So far, Postman, the command line execution in Postman is provided in two different ways. One is via Newman command line, and other one is the Postman CLI, which is a new addition in recent days. I gave them a nickname. I can say this is not the official name, but I term Newman as the elder brother of Postman and Postman CLI as the younger brother of Postman. To explain each of them in short quickly, Newman is the open source command line collection runner for Postman. This is created by Postman, but it is maintained and supported by the community contributors. You can effortlessly run and test your Postman collection from Newman. The next is about Postman CLI. Postman CLI is a very secure command line companion for companion. Why I am saying is like this is purely maintained by Postman and it is secured by Postman as well. So these are the definitions, or I can briefly explain Newman and Postman CLI. Not only this, Newman and Postman CLI, you can run them both locally as well as from the automated framework. So today I'll be explaining in both ways, like how locally you have to run your collections and how you can, incorporate in your automated framework. So, moving to the local running, like how do I run my test run locally with Newman? This picture you can keep in mind. These are the four steps that you need to follow when you run the test locally. Install Node.js, install Newman, export your collection locally, and run the collection from the terminal. I'll be practically showing you how we need to do this in the demo section. So need not worry about that. For now, you can just remember this slide, keeping this in your mind. How do I run my Postman CLI test run locally? For this, you need to install Postman CLI. The command to install it is already provided beautifully in the document provided by the Postman team itself. You can just pick there and just install it in your machine. Then go to the automate runs via CLI command in Postman, which is available in the connection runner. Get the command from there. What are the commands that you need to get? In order to execute Postman CLI, you need to first log in into your Postman account. For that, you will need your API key. You can, if you know the API key well and good beforehand itself, or you can generate it on spot itself. So just get the key, log in into your account, and the command is already, developed for you, or it is automatically available by default for you. You just need to copy that, run the command in your terminal, and get the test result link. When I say test result link, it will give you a URL which will direct you to the test results that gets generated after you run your test suite. So just keep these two images in mind. So when we practically do that, it will be easy for you to correlate. Moving ahead with the automated framework. So when I talk about automated framework, there are many frameworks that are supported for this execution, but I have not explored all the areas. In recent times, I had a chance to explore or do some POC on GitHub Actions. That's where I landed up knowing how to run Postman CLI as well as Newman with the help of GitLab Actions. So before I jump into the core topic for this towards this automated framework, the ones that I'll be showing now is we'll be running the workflow manually. So we are not going to create an automated build in CI/CD pipeline as such, because bear with me, I have not explored in that area, so I won't be able to showcase that. But for sure, how to create a workflow, how to run them manually, you will all learn gradually in today's session. So, knowing the basics of GitHub Action is also one mandatory thing before we jump into like creating workflows there. So, GitHub Actions help automate tasks using workflow based approach. It allows you to perform certain kind of actions when an event occurs in your repository. So, this is done via triggers. So, trigger, when I say, it can be a push that is made to any branch in your repository, a push that is made to the master branch, or it can be even a manual run to the workflow that you intend to do, which we'll be using that approach in today's session. So GitHub Actions use YML syntax to define a workflow. Each workflow is stored in a separate YML file in the code repository, and the directory that will be available is GitHub Workflows. Just to give you an overview of how the code structure will look like when we design the code under GitHub Action is like, all GitHub Action begins with an event. Like I said, events are the triggers that run the configured actions. So it can be a push, it can be a pull request, or it can be a manual hit via workflow dispatch. Events trigger some actions, but what do they exactly trigger? It is the workflows. Workflow is a component that holds the jobs to execute. So what are the jobs? Jobs are nothing but it's a configuration that holds the steps that need to be performed. Steps are nothing but the commands that you need to perform. So since that theoretically I'm explaining, let's just view this particular snippet of a code. So like I said, it triggers with an event. So it's a manual trigger. So it will be a workflow dispatch followed by a job with certain steps tied up to it. So this is the snippet that I'll be showing you live today when I show the demo part. So need not worry if you don't understand it right away. Okay, so moving ahead, now that I have explained Newman and Postman, then somebody might think, Jency, then should I move from Newman to Postman CLI? The answer to this is, if you are an existing happy Newman user, there is no reason right now for you to switch to Postman CLI. Newman is not deprecated yet. However, if you are just getting started with learning about API automation with Postman, and you need a CLI tool to integrate with your CI/CD builds, probably Postman CLI is a good place to start, as Postman helps you to share the ready snippet to kickstart your automated workflows. Okay, this slide is very self-explanatory. You can find it even in the learning docs that is provided by Postman themselves. Finally, I'll just give highlights of API contract test and GRPC test. This was a recent topic that fascinated me a lot. So that's the reason I thought of capturing the highlights from testing area. So let's understand them in a very short way. I won't deep dive in towards contract testing and GRPC test. So before knowing what exactly is contract testing, or rather consumer driven contract testing, we need to understand what exactly is a consumer and what exactly is a provider. In layman terms, if I have to explain them, assuming that you have built a house and you want to incorporate certain utilities for it, for example electricity utility or water utility, and you approach the electric utility company first. They say, okay, we are fine with that and we'll provide you the necessary things. But for that, we would need an agreement to be signed up by you, between you and us. So we'll be signing a contract or an agreement between us and the electric unit provider, saying that for these many usages, this is the amount that we need to pay. So ideally, consumers are nothing but we are the person who are requesting it, and the providers are nothing but the electric utility company. Keeping this thought in mind, from API testing perspective, API producers, you can assume that they are nothing but the developers who will be like giving us the APIs, and the API consumers are the ones when it comes to testing. You can treat it that you are the API consumer who are using ideally to it. Thinking about the contract that I specified in my previous slide, somebody might think that is it similar to the API doc? Partially, yes, I can say, where API behavior is typically described in the API docs with list of variable endpoints, request, expected response data, along with some, response sample responses, and so on. So that this document are then used by people building systems that consume those APIs. But at times, API producers may need to change the response or rename an endpoint altogether. So every now and then, the API consumer should keep an eye on this API doc. At times, there can be a lag and there can be some miscommunication between conveying the changes that happens between the API producer and API consumer. There comes the need of API contracts. So API producers can create a contract between the producer, that is API producer and API consumer, by using certain tools which are available in market. For example, API Blueprint, Open API, Pact, and even Postman Collection. Pact is one tool that, based on my research, I understood that it is solely used for contract testing, but I haven't gotten chance to explore the tool. But when we talk about Postman, in Postman, we don't have any built-in feature to test your contracts, but there is an approach that you can perform your contract testing. So I'll be showing how you can perform this contract testing from Postman. So this is about contract testing, an interesting topic, but in Postman, it's still I can say under progress, or it's still ongoing process. Next is the GRPC request. HTTP based API development, the most modern REST APIs follow request response models of communicating between the client and server. They are built on the HTTP version 1.1, whereas GRPC based API development is evolved based on the design of RPC, that is remote procedure call, which was created late 1970s, which was designed with HTTP 2.0. It commonly uses the protocol buffers, that is protobufs in common terms, if I have to state, and it strictly follows the binary communication between client and server. So in layman terms, if somebody is asking me that what is the difference between this particular GRPC and this HTTP based API development, let's say we want to ask a friend several questions over a telephone. By HTTP 1.1, we can call our friend, ask a question, get the answer, and end the call. We call them again, ask the next question, and end the call again. And so on until all our questions are like answered by our friend. But by using HTTP 2.0, you can make a single call, ask all your questions all at one shot that needs to be answered by your friend. Then your result is like in front of you. So this is the ideal difference between REST and GRPC. A background of GRPC. Like HTTP REST APIs, GRPC has different service method that it supports to transfer the data. The four different services are unary, client streaming, server streaming, and bidirectional streaming. I won't go in detail in for now, because from testing perspective, I feel that's not relevant. But it's always good to know what exactly each service does. So unary is nothing but the client makes a single request and the server sends a single response, similar to the REST that we usually do. Client streaming is nothing but the client can send multiple requests to the server, the last of which is an indication that the stream data is finished, and the server sends back a single response. Server streaming, the client sends an initial request alerting to the server that it is ready to receive a stream of data, and the server responds with many responses. So the last response will indicate that the stream is completed. Bidirectional streaming: after an initial unary connection between the client and the server, both client and server can send streams of information. So this is something I can say, information that you can keep in mind. Need not deep dive into that when it comes to testing space. But in testing area, what are the things that we need to know is how do we write the tests for grpc requests. So in postman it's very handy because I try to explore that it is pretty similar to the ones that you write it for rest requests. So I'll be showing few things when it comes to creating test scripts for grpc request in today's demo. So I think enough of theory. So let's go to the demo part for today. So things we'll have a look in demo is like I'll give you a feel of Postman tool first, like how the Postman tool looks when you launch, and the common methods that we discussed in today's session in my previous slide. I'll be showing you how to write the basic test scripts. Also, we'll be knowing how two requests can talk to each other with certain features that are available in Postman. Apart from that, how do we chain our request where we have complex workflows in order, at times there can be chances, you have to run an endpoint simultaneously at multiple times. So how do I chain my request? We'll be knowing that. Then we'll be running the test from collection runner, that is an inbuilt feature. After which I will show you how we can integrate our test runs with our notification channels. This is very handy when it comes to communication with our product owners or the entire basical project team. So Postman has a feasibility of integrating it with your notification channels. So I'll be showing today how you can integrate with your Slack account. Mocking and monitoring examples, few examples that I have already created, I'll show that with you. Finally, the grpc and contract test, not in detail, but I'll try to show how to write the test for these two type of tests. Finally, we'll end our session with Newman and Postman CLI. This is one of the interesting topic I can say towards the end. Locally and in GitHub Actions, how do I run them? So that's the agenda that I have planned for the demo session. So without further delay, let me just go back and open my Postman. Okay, so I think my Postman is like viewed now. So like I said, this is how when you download your Postman desktop app and you launch it, this is how it looks like. You need to create your account for that. And once you land into this page, the first topic that hits in mind is the first building block that I explained, that is nothing but the workspace. So you can just create your workspace. There are different options for enabled for you to create your workspace. We're not going to create one today. I have already one created for today's meetup. So I'm just opening that in front of you. From this, let's see what are the building blocks that we discussed in previously. So these are the building blocks that I showcased or explained previously, like collection, environment, and the different request. Not only this, you can navigate to all of them from the left pan as well. So giving a good feel of what Postman tool is all about, let's deep dive into the basic concepts of the different methods that are supported by Postman, or not just Postman, like it's a commonly used methods I can say. So I explained about get, post, patch, and delete. So get is nothing but where you get certain requests from your API. So this is one public API that I am using, wherein it gives me a list of users that are available, registered into that particular application. Post is nothing but which allows you to create fresh data. So like I said, you can post data to your system. So for instance, if I have to change this to engineer, then let's see if it gets changed or not. Yes, it got changed. So this is how post work. Patch is nothing but it just updates the existing data. So this particular user was engineer. Let's see what was his. He is engineer now, and I'm going to update him back to doctor. So this is how update works. Delete is nothing but where you delete that particular user entirely from the system. So these are the basic common methods that are like used. Now we have the request ready. I want my request to talk to each other. How do I do that? You can do it via a feature that is enabled in Postman, that is nothing but variables. How that works is like, you can define your variable in different ways. You can define your variables at environment level by creating a separate variable, like how I separate environment, like how I created for this particular meetup purpose. Or you can create it at collection level, you can create it globally. Anyways, where everything is possible for you to do. So the scenario that I would expect here is like, I have registered a user and I want his details to be like projected, or only his details I want to view. So how do I do that? I have list of users already done. So from my response, how do I write this? So in Postman, if you are new to Postman, you see this right pan, there are certain snippets readily available for you to get started of writing these snippets. So one who is new, you can just click any of this. For instance, if I have to just write an assertion to check whether my status code is 200 or not, just click that particular snippet and it automatically generates this snippet for you. So these are for beginners who are new to Postman, they can get started with this. So going back to our request to talk to each other, what I have done is, I have taken the entry of the user that was registered and I have set it as an environment variable. So if you see here in my environment, the particular user's variable is like stored. Once this variable is like stored, to the next request, what I'll be doing is, my API has a feature wherein I can pass the user ID and I can fetch his data. So from the variable, I can get the details of that particular user alone. So using this, each one request is talking to the another request. So this is how variables is an feature that helps us to combine or enable communication between two different requests in a collection. To move ahead, chaining request becomes handy when in scenarios where you have a complex workflow and it seems that you need to iterate the same endpoint again and again. That is one use case. Another one is like, you have a scenario. For instance, in this scenario, what I want to do is, I have a library system. I want to add a book, check if the book is added, then I want to update the book with some genre, and then check if the book is like updated correctly or not. But in my collection, if you see, all of the requests are like shuffled. So I need to make a chaining request in between them. So how do I do that? There is a feature known as Postman set next request. So what it does is, if I define the particular request name, it will just call that particular request to hit once that is like hit successfully or not. Let me show that to you after I run. So this takes us to the next topic as well, running your test suite in collection runner. So how do we run the collection runner? There is, once you click this folder, there is a run button. Just click on that, run manually, which is nothing but you're running in the collection runner. So when I click on this, since I have set the Postman set next request, even though my requests are all shuffled, I can see the way I wanted my scenario to be executed. This was very a simple example, but when it comes to complex workflow where a single request needs to be looped again and again, you can use this Postman set next request command. So that was about chaining request. Moving ahead to mocking and monitoring. Mocking is nothing but like in Postman, there are two different ways, three different ways of creating it. One, you can do directly from the mock servers here, or you can do it from the collection level, or even from the new panel. There is an advanced feature where you can call the mock servers. But right now, what I'm going to do is like, assuming that my collection is right now a skeleton phase, when I mean that it's under still development, I just have a skeleton endpoint that is shared to me by my dev team. So what I'll do is, I'll just quickly mock this particular collection entirely. Once I mock it, my Postman collection will give me a mock server generated for it. Mock servers are nothing but a basic URL that will be provided. So the next step that I need to do is, I have already like just created it just to save time. In the base URL, you just need to change your endpoint that the Postman created for you. You just need to replace that and just hit based on the request. It will return you the response. But one prerequisite here is like, when you are mocking it from the collection, every request should have an example, because Postman will refer to these responses to generate the predefined response for you. So generating examples, when I mean, you see this is the example that you need to do. You can just add your example in this pattern, or you can just save your responses when the initial skeleton and just click on save. It will create an example for you. So that is one prerequisite when you need to mock the entire collection from you. But how is this useful? It is useful in many different ways. When your development is ongoing and you are still in the designing phase and you need to write your test scripts, you can just mock your collection by just getting the responses from the API doc, create your mock server, and start writing your assertions. So once your API is ready, you can just replace this particular URL with the URL that is like developed, and you're saving a lot of time in this scenario. That's the advantageous part in mocking. Moving ahead is monitors. Monitors is nothing but you can Postman had two features. One is uptime monitor and another is collection based monitor. Uptime monitor they have closed for us right now. It's nothing but monitoring a single endpoint, whereas collection based monitor is very handy when it comes to monitoring your test workflows. So if you have a complex workflow and you need to monitor it, for instance, let's say in UAT you have an API endpoint which needs to be like, monitor day in and out, you can create a monitor for that particular collection and monitor it accordingly. For that, I have already created a monitor. How do you do that? It's pretty simple. Just click on this three icon, monitor collection, set up all configuration. It is just one time setup and your monitor is all set. This is the monitor that I have already created it. So this runs for me every 5 p.m. every day, and lets me know that whether my API is healthy or not. To add on to this, like I said, Postman has a feature of integration. When I go to my home page, you see this integration concept. It is nothing but integrating it with different parties. So, like I said, you can integrate with your notification channels. There are many integrations that you can do. Notification itself has many tools to integrate, but I have integrated with my Slack account. It is a pretty simple configuration that you need to do. If anyone wants to explore in this area, please ping me personally. I'll try to share the document how to configure it. Now that we are running short of time, I'll quickly show you how this particular monitor runs. And every time when this monitor runs at 5 p.m., what happens is it goes to my Slack account as a notification as well. So every day I need not come to my Postman and check that whether my API is up and running. I just need to check whether I received the notification and check the status over here, by which it states that my API is up and running. This becomes handy when you're working with your a huge team member and everyone needs to be notified about how healthy is your API. So that was about monitoring. Next is about the GRPC and contract testing. Contract testing, like I said, it's an approach that you can follow. So in Postman, like I said, API consumers will be giving API producers certain negotiations to define certain things. So being a tester, what I'll do is I'll inform my developer to give me the correct structure of the response. Structure, when I mean the proper schema that will be returned in my response. So assuming that my development team has given me this response that these are the array, I need an array within which I need certain properties like title, author, ID with certain data types. How do I validate the schema? This is the approach that I was talking about. In Postman, there is an inbuilt library known as AJV. This is nothing but which validates your schema. So since it is inbuilt, you just need to call it via a function known as require and then validate it with your response that you get it from the endpoint. If it is valid, it will run without any issue, or if it has any flaws, it will direct you and park it into your console log. So that's where I can say partially a contract test that you have performed in your API. Next is about GRPC test. Mm, in GRPC test, I'm not going to talk everything about in detail, but GRPC test is a recent feature that has come up in Postman. One magic that happens in Postman is like you just need to provide the service, and Postman, what it does is it replicates or it reflects your server, by which you can just come to know what all methods are like available in your service. For instance, if I it's a unary method that I am passing, and my endpoints are all done. So the more focus is about how do we write the test scripts for this. So in similar pattern, like for REST, we had the test tab. In GRPC, we have the scripts wherein before invoke and after invoke is there. Before is nothing but the prerequisite tab that we had in REST, and after response is nothing but the test. Similar pattern, we have automated snippets. You can use it. There it was 200 okay. Here it will be 0 okay. So approach is same. The only thing is few features are like different. So if anyone is working with grpc, please don't be afraid. You can use Postman, just keeping in mind your REST concepts. So that was about the different test and the different test scripting that we did it from Postman itself. Now moving back to the Newman CLI and Postman CLI, which is one of the interesting thing. I'll quickly walk through it locally and from the GitHub action. Locally, how do we do? Let's recollect the slide that we had. So for Newman, the thing was we need to install Newman, Node.js, then we need to have Newman, and then you have to export your collection in your local and then run it from the command line. So Node.js and Newman is already installed in my machine, and I'm just going to run my collection that I have handy over here. So locally, you can run Newman in this perspective. So when this is run, this is how the result will look like. Now going back to Postman CLI, if you remember, I said Postman CLI, everything is provided by the Postman. So when we move back, for instance, if I have to run this particular collection from my Postman CLI locally, how do I do that? Go to your Run tab. There is an option known as Automate Runs via CLI. Just click on that. You see this, there is an automated snippet. This is nothing but the command that you need to run in your terminal. Like I said, Postman CLI works on login and logout basis. You need to log in into your Postman account with your API key. If you know the API key, well and good, or else you can generate it over here. And this is the command that allows you to run the collection. Okay, so how do I do that? I have my Postman CLI already installed. I'm not going to install it again. I'm just going to run my collection. I will just log in first with my API key, and then I'll just run the collection. These are the commands that I have taken from this particular area. So I have not written or I have not by hearted anything. It's all from given to me by the Postman. So you see this, this collection I had integrated it to my Slack account. So I'll just give you a brief overview what this collection does. So this collection, what it does is it checks whether I have watered my plants, and if it is less than 100 percentage, it will intimate in me in my Slack account saying that you need to water your plants. So just assuming this scenario, this collection was built. So right now you saw the pop up. So in my collection, so this is how it says that the plant has been watered for 5 seconds. So locally, this was how it looks. Now going back to the GitLab actions. So how do you do that in GitHub actions? You need to have a GitHub account. Create a new repository. I'm not going to show everything in detail here because we are running short of time. So just create a new repository. Once you create the repository, you need to direct to the actions tab where it allows you to create a simple single workflow. From there, uh, let me just go to the repository that I have already created. Then it will be easy for me to explain. So okay, so once your repository is created, you need to land into this actions tab. There you'll see an option to create new workflow. Now that it is already set up, you cannot see that particular layout. It will give you an option to create single workflow. Just click on that. It will direct you to the GitLab workflows directory. From there you need to create your YML code. So this was the code that I showed previously in our slides. So like I said, I'm going to run it manually. So we are using workflow dispatch. This is a job. These are the steps. What are the steps that I need to do? I need to install my Newman. I need to install my HTML extra, because this particular snippet, what it does is I want to generate my test report as well. One feature, keep in mind, Newman can generate reports, but Postman CLI cannot generate reports. It is not supporting that. But in that option, it gives you the test result link. So once I execute this, what happens is, let's quickly go there. Just click on the workflow that you have designed. So it enables an option to run workflow directly. So just click on this run. It will take a few minutes to run. So I'll just show the ones that was executed already. You see this is the one that was executed, the test run. And finally, the report was like generated. Like Newman has the feasibility for generating reports. I'll just show you how the report looks like. This is how the report looks like. So you can just, this is very useful, and it is, for people who are technically not that relevant, they can just have a look saying that, okay, the test is, results are all passed and where it fails. So this also gives me a notification in my Slack account. This was about Newman CLI, but the code that just now I showed you was all written by me. I need to know certain technical stuffs when I write the code. But when it comes to Postman CLI, the magic is something there. Postman CLI gives you the code snippet ready for you. Let's go back to Postman. I land to the same collection run page. Click on the run or run automate runs via CLI. Just click on this run on CI/CD configure command. You see this, there are different CI/CD provider. Like I said, you will have all the ready-made snippets available to kickstart your automation. That's the beauty of Postman CLI. So for now, I have just elaborated GitHub actions. So you see this is the code snippet. You can just copy this and add it in your workflow. You need not deep dive or Google stuff to create your scripts. Later, you can customize it as per your wish. So I have copied the snippet already. Going back to our Postman CLI, I have already created my workflow. The YML file is all ready. So this is just the copy paste of that particular snippet that code Postman gave me, and I'm just passing there. I have created a secret. Secret is nothing but just a variable which hides my Postman API key. It's not recommended to showcase it it's for privacy constraint. So I have created a secret for that, and then you can just run it. The same principle. It's that you are hitting an event manually. Job is scheduled. You are writing with certain steps. In actions, just click on this run. You can just run the workflow. I'm not going to run this because it will take a little time. So here, if you notice, there is no report generated because Postman CLI doesn't have any feature of reporting as such, but it has an alternative to it. When I click on this run API test, it gives me a link that is nothing but the Postman test link. Let's open it and see. So you see this. This is a test run result which opens directly in your URL. You can also see this from the Postman desktop app. What you can do is can just go here, runs. You can just open from here. Another option is in history. You can just click on this. This is the latest run that has happened. So this is how you can automate your execution from Postman CLI and Newman CLI. Right now, I showed you how to run the workflow manually, but you can build you can create a proper automated pipeline. I haven't explored that yet. Maybe if I get a chance to showcase that in near future, I'll try to do that. So that was a quick wrap up of the different things that I wanted to show from demo perspective. A quick recap of what we learned today. We learned about APIs and API testing. We got to know about Postman, the test scripts, how to write in Postman, understood mocking and monitoring importance, the command line companions, interesting topic like Newman CLI and Postman CLI, highlights of API contract and GRPC testing. So if you are new to Postman, I think this would be a useful session for you all. So, thank you so much for your valuable time. If you have any queries or you need any resources in particular, you can always ping me on links. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you can connect me in LinkedIn or in Twitter. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jency. That was a
Yeah,
great session. We have two questions that I think we can take.
sure.
So, first question is from Arpit Srivastava.
Mhm.
He's asking, is database verification possible through Postman to verify data saved correctly in DB in tests tab?
Okay, so for this, I'm not sure like how you can directly connect it, but there is a feature where you can extract your data into certain data files and validate those data files within your test scripts when you write it. So that's one possibility that you can do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question, Arpit. We have another question from Kalpana. Can we do schema testing for APIs in bulk using Postman?
Yes, we can do that. That's where I was explaining about the schema structure. Just in case if the dev team, let's say they are not providing you certain schemas for the response that you get, you can use certain schema generators online and just pass your response and get the schema generated, based on which you can use the library that I showed in my demo AJV, which helps you to validate your schema completely.
Okay. I hope that answers your question, Kalpana. We have another question from Mohammad Raja. Is Postman GRPC kind of good and similar to Bloom GRPC?
That I'm pretty not sure, but like I said, GRPC is a recent topic that Postman has incorporated. So people are learning, I can say. If you want to know more about this, you can join the community of Postman where people are talking more about this. But to me, I have just touch based the basics from testing perspective. So I have limited information in that. Sorry.
Understood, understood. So probably, Mohammed, you can join the Postman community and there
Yes.
you can get the answer. So we have another question from Sanket. Can we do data-driven API testing with Postman?
Yeah, for sure you can do that. It's handy. You can do that. There is a feasibility.
Okay. Another question from Maheshwaran. Can we use Postman for GraphQL?
Yes, we can. We can.
Okay. I hope that answers your question. We have another question from Kalpana. I'll just show it on the stage. Is there any way to read API requests, body, and method get post from external CSV file?
There is. You can do that. Like I said, variables can be a handy feature here. You can do that. There are possibilities to do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
understood. I hope that answers your question, Kalpana. Is there any other questions? You can, if there are any other questions, you can connect to Jency on her LinkedIn,
Yes.
and she will be happy to help you. So, thank you so much, Jency, for that session. It was a great session. Like the
Thank
demo
you.
added a layer of extra understanding to the whole concepts that you explained. So, thank you for doing that demo.
Sure.
Thank you to everyone for attending this event on a Saturday morning. We
Yes.
hope you had a great learning time in both of the sessions, and we will see you soon in another event with another guest or another two guests. Till then, keep learning and keep joining more events. Thank you so much, and
Thank
bye.
you. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.